Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you're here. My name's Leanne. I'm with the Boulder Public Library, and I'm so excited that you're here today. We're going to learn all kinds of new things about fairies and different types of fae and where to find them and how to talk to them, and we're super excited. We would like to thank the Boulder Library Foundation for sponsoring this program, as well as 90% of our programs. Please note that all of the policies that apply for behavior and expectations in our buildings also apply online. And without further ado, please join me in a virtual warm welcome for Erica, the Enchantress.
Hello, good morning. Hi, Leanne. So good to see you. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. I'm so excited to share fairies with you. And I know you have a love of fairies as well.
I do. I'm so excited to see what you have in store for us. So take it away.
Thank you so much. So my name is Erica Sodos, as the beautiful, lovely fairy-like Leanne said. And it is my honor and my pleasure to share with you this morning my passion for the unseen realm. And today we are going to talk about the different kinds of fairies through cultures and lore. And the part I'm the most excited about is how to experience the fairy realm. And you can ask questions, you can type them in, and I really encourage you, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, to participate, because you see, fairies, like this medium, live in the in-between and in-betwixt places. So please, your questions will come up. Someone will put them up for us and we can answer them. So I'm really excited you're here. And I'd love to find out what you think a fairy is before we get into what I believe and the research and what other people said. So I invite you now to just type in what you think a fairy is. And while you're doing that, I am going to read a quote. We're going to start with a quote from the one and wonderful, who we'll talk about later, Brian Froud. At the edge of our world, at the edge of the other world, the beautiful and mysterious fairies stand, watching and waiting to greet us, inviting us to journey with them as our guides while we walk the infinite paths of the fairy. And so now we invoke these magical beings. I want you to think about why you're here at this session on this Saturn day, what you want to get, how you feel to be inspired. We call on the nature elementals that share this beautiful planet with us. Welcome. May you come here today and inspire us to feel more magic and enchantment in our lives, as well as do better for the earth, because you, fairies, are the earth herself. Welcome, fairies. Okay, so before we get into fairies, I want to tell you a little bit about my personal story with fairies, or we get into the types of fairies. And I didn't see anybody. Did anybody type in? Did anybody type in what they think a fairy is? I didn't see anybody. So please type it in if you have an idea, because I'm going to talk about it now. But first, my experience with fae. So I came from a pretty dysfunctional, difficult upbringing. Some of you may, and I'm sorry. And so there was a lot of chaos in my home, screaming and yelling. And in order to, I hope it's okay, I'm sharing this intimate story, to escape the drama, I would spend a lot of time outside. And I would walk around the house. And we just lived in suburbia. It wasn't a very natural area that was full of wildlife or anything. But I would walk around the house and I would talk to beings. And we had some trees and some flowers. And I especially would bond with the little fairy phlox flowers. And I'd even invite these beings into the house. And my parents, I would make them set a place for them. And so I was told my whole life, my family said they were my invisible friends, right? And I forgot about them for many, many, many years until I was in my 30s, when I was getting into the metaphysical and I discovered a love of fairies, that I remembered that as a very little girl at 4, 5, and 6, I had fairy friends. That's who they were. They were fairies. And I had just forgotten because, as we get older, we lose our sense of magic. So that was my experience. Oh, Forrest wrote, would like me, he thinks a fairy is a little person with a wand and wings. So, great photo with the kitty. I like that. Awesome. So a little person, we're going to talk about that. They are definitely a type of fairy. We're going to talk about that. Those are like the air fairies that have wings. And there are all different sizes of fairies. And so what is a fairy? So a fairy is basically part of nature. It's the consciousness of nature. So I call myself an animist. So for those of you who don't know what animism is the belief that all in existence has a life, has a spirit, has energy, right? These plants, rocks, flowers, trees, that they're alive with a consciousness. And that's the belief of animism. And now people think fairies are many, many things. A magical being that lives and is connected and related to nature. They help us to remember to be connected with nature and here to help us. Rajni, yes, that's awesome, because that's kind of what I'm saying right now. That's kind of an animistic belief as well, right? That they're part of nature. I love that. So everybody, what she said is absolutely beautiful. And so they're part of nature, and they're like a riddle we can't solve, right? We're trying. So in this session, we're going to put labels on fairies, but you can't really put labels on the mysterious, right? Humans, we're always trying to categorize, to label things, and that doesn't always really work. Now, the etymology of the word fairy is fascinating and multidimensional, and there's many, many ways to spell the word. It's taken from Latin, German, Old French, English, but essentially it meant fate, destiny, to tell, enchantment, magic, power, that kind of thing. And so fairies have existed through all over the world, but not everyone uses the word fairy, right? That's a European kind of concept. But in all other countries, or it's English concepts, they have these nature beings that share the planet with us, right? That animate. That's what the word animate is from, right? Bring to life. And many people think that fairies there's lots of beliefs. And in our session together, I really invite you to trust yourself, because fairies are here to teach us and trick us and to help us grow. So if I say something and you think, no way, like maybe Forrest is like, no, I believe all fairies are little beings. There's no big fairies. Well, that, right? They kind of live in that reality, imaginary blending place. So I want you to trust yourself, and you will experience fairies more if you do that. But if I say things that inspire you, I hope that you feel inspired and you get nuggets of gems to help you in your life experience the enchantment of the fairy kingdom. So some people say that fairies are fallen demons and fallen angels. And, with the Advent, when Christianity came around, they sort of separated, right, that spirituality. So they wanted to make fairies not necessarily something we would believe in. Some people believe that fairies are an existence of people that existed before humans. Some people believe they're deities, that they're gods and goddesses, or they're the dead, or they're the resurrected. There's many, many beliefs. And fairies the term is an umbrella term, right? So what he said, what Forrest said at the beginning, he, she, they said was that, little beings, right, with wings. And that is a type of fairy, but gnomes are fairy, trolls are fairies, right? Goblins are fairies. It's these beings that live with us, but in other dimensions that we can't always access, but we can access. And I hope that this will help you access it. And fairies, exist in all kinds of lore. Many of you, who's familiar with the word changelings? If you're familiar, type it in. Let us know if you're familiar with changelings. So or not familiar with changelings. Now, changelings is when a fairy steals the human baby, right, to be raised by the fairies, and replaces the baby with another being. And it looks, because fairies have some glamour and they can disguise what the baby looks like, but it might be an old fairy, right? Very, very old, or a piece of wood. So clearly they're not going to live very long, and they die young, right? So changelings are also part of the mythology. Often if a baby died young, they would say that, it was the fairies, it was a changeling. And so fairies have a very different temperament than us, right? And a very different ethic. And I don't like to use the word bad and good as such a final binary, right? There's all kinds of colors and shades of bad and good. Some people say there's the bad fairies and then the good fairies. Even the bad fairies are here to trick us. They just have a totally different code of ethics as us, right? So we can't really understand them. Okay, we'll address that question. So we can't always understand them. And we're going to try to make sense of them, like that question, right? So, she asked, is a changeling like that of a shapeshifter? And so, many, many fairies can shapeshift. And if you're not familiar with that concept, it's to be able to turn your bodies into different beings. It's like if I could just turn myself into a lion or a pig or something, like right away, two animals that I happen to adore. And so we'll get to the shape-shifting when we talk about glamour in a moment. So it's really good to have humor with fairies because, again, a lot of them are very mischievous and tricksters. Does anybody know anyone in their life like that? A partner, a kid, a parent, a sibling. Fairies don't have a sense of time. And I think that is what one of my favorite forms of fairy is that they don't have any sense of time. They live in the past, the present, and the future. It's non-linear. Right? They're in the ever-ending flow of life, like a tree. Now, why we think fairies are these pretty female figures with wings has a lot to do with art and literature, right? Does art create reality, or does reality create art? I could talk to you with you about that for hours. And so, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, Shakespeare was writing about fairies, right? A long time ago. And so there a lot of artists over the last 100 years have painted artists. And two specifically, which we're going to see now, are Sophie Anderson, who you can see. So Sophie Anderson painted the fairy that is on the right if you're looking at your screen. And she's the one holding a little jewel bag. So this was from the late 1800s, right? And so this shaped, fairies have white skin. Fairies have pretty red hair. That was a belief that then formed. And again, if these images help you, I encourage you to use them. Now, for me, they're a little bit limiting, right? So, and on the left, these books are beautiful. Cicely Mary Baker in the 1920s wrote a series of books of flower fairies. And you can see this is the chicory flower. They're very beautiful. She actually used real children to take these photos and made flower costumes with them. And I think fairies do sometimes look like that, but it's a limiting view to think that fairies are solely human-like. I'd like to now show you some of the ways fairies really can look, right? Different styles and ways of fairies. So I mentioned Brian Froud earlier, and now we're going to see some of his pictures of different types of fairies. So these are all Brian Froud. He lives with his wife. He sees and paints fairies. I believe he lives in Wales or Scotland, in that area. And he's also done, the art design for many movies, The Labyrinth, lots of things. And so as you can see, these fairies are very, very different than those paintings. Now, the one that's second over, that's just like a ray of light, often that's how fairies appear, right? like light. Has anyone ever seen a flash of light while hiking or outside or even in your house? I would love to know, type it in, because that's why one of the many ways that I experience fairies is through lights, I experience them different ways. And again, we're going to talk about this a lot today. We experience them. We don't necessarily see them as strong as these characters. And the one that is next to the light, the second over from the other side, the green woman, oh my goodness, she's one of my faves. So you've probably heard of the green man. She's the green woman. She's nature. She's that part of yourself when you're wild and untamed and outside. The fairies are here, right? Rajni said earlier, the fairies are here to connect us to nature. And that's what she wants. She wants you to run barefoot in the rain, right? And you can see the fairies on the sides, right? The two on the sides. That's Ib the retriever, the one who's holding the little crystal ball with the dark background. He helps us find missing items, right? And then you can see that little guy at the end, you might not consider him that attractive, but personally, I think you might even call him creepy, but I love that being. And again, the him and the her, some fairies do appear to us as gendered, but many are non-binary. Is that kid in the little corner a male or a female, right? So fairies have many, many, many looks, and their size can be very different as well. Thank you so much for the photos. That's wonderful. I hope that was inspiring to you. And so again, their size can be very, there's records of fairies being 1/4 of an inch, which is tiny, people seeing them, hundreds of years ago. There's also really big fairies, right? Like huge, it can be all sizes. And many fairies have wings. And the fairies that have wings are fairies of air. And they don't need the wings to fly in the same way that a butterfly does or a bird. They are propelled with thought and energy because that's the realm they live in, right? More in that energetic realm. And then there's the eyes. They say that the human eyes or non-human animal eyes are the windows to the soul, but fairies' eyes are vast and deep. You can be taken away to fairyland by looking in their eyes. And many fairies have horns. Many, many. Actually, the green woman you just saw, she had horns. And the reason is because fairies are parts of nature, part of animals, human, non-human animals, part of trees and plants. So they have horns. Many animals have, many fairies have tails, right? Which they use for a lot of different things. We're going to talk about that later. And somebody asked about shape-shifting. And again, we're trying to make sense of the nonsensical. Is that a word, nonsensical? So, so glamour, this concept of glamour is the etymology. Etymology means the history of words. And so glamour came from grammar, which meant to learn. And glamour, and also magic, enchantment, and spell. So that's what glamour is, right? It's magic and spell. So fairies are able to, I don't want to say the word control because that's not really how they think, but they are able to shift what you perceive, right? So are they actually shape-shifting into another being, or are they manipulating how you experience a situation, including them, right? So fairies can not only change their bodies, fairies can change objects and surroundings, right? Which is why some people find themselves in fairyland. They didn't know they were there, but they were under a glamour, as it is called. And fairies also, you could have a huge feast and you could be eating a feast. You could think it's a feast, but it's really just ash and dirt and rocks, right? So fairies, are they shape shifting that fairy that they put as a changeling, to answer your question, or are they putting a glamour over the being and controlling what you see? I believe that some fairies use one of those skills and other fairies use both of those skills. What do you think? Right? So let's now talk about the different kinds of fairies. And again, we are categorizing the uncategorizable. So they're elemental. We're going to Yes, jinn and genies are considered fairies. Good question, Julianne. Yes, definitely. I consider them fairies. So now we're going to do elemental. So I think the first element we're going to go with is air, right? So air fairies. Oh, and now we can look at the picture of the sylph, right? So air fairies are of thought and ideas. Look at her. She's gorgeous, right? They're made of pure energy. We connect to these fairies when we have new ideas or when we're cleansing parts of ourselves away. We can call on these beings to help us at that time. And they control weather and storm and wind. You know, in Ireland, they say that if there's a really bad whirlwind, it's a group of trooping fairies running, and you have to bless yourself or you'll be blown away, right? And again, they're all over the world, right? Thank you so much for that photo. There's El Numero, which is a Spanish weather fairy, right? That doesn't look anything like humans, and they cause storms. And then in Lithuania, they have the Vehopatis, which are unpredictable fairies, masters of the winds. Now, excuse me if I'm pronouncing any of these fairies incorrectly. But you know, I think they're fine with that. They laugh at us humans, our obsession with things like having to name everybody. Maban are Burmese fairies, responsible for good and bad winds. And we can connect to these fairies by going outside, by feeling the storm. Is anyone besides me obsessed with watching clouds? Yesterday, I saw the most amazing fairy in a cloud, and I knew they were there to bless our program because the air fairies want us to clear away what's not working, right? And create a better world for them because they are part of nature, and we have to take care of nature to take care of them, right? As ecosystems can be destroyed, so too are they, because that's where they live. So air fairies. So I love wind. And for those of you who are in Colorado or other places where we have big winds, I invite you to shift your perspective on wind. When you're in wind next time, feel the energy, feel the whistling. Often fairies will communicate through the whistling of the wind, right? Those are air fairies. And then there's the fire fairies. These are fairies of passion and creativity and will. And they're very often related to the household fairies, which I can't wait to talk about because a lot of us are spending more time than usual at home. And so we can really connect to these household fairies. And that's because they like hearths back in the day when everyone had a hearth. Now our hearth is usually our oven, or maybe you're lucky enough to have a fireplace. And then you might have some fire fairies in your house. And so fire fairies, if you can watch bonfires or fires or even a flame, right? Often flames dance. I encourage you to look at the way the flame's dancing and you might see a fairy being there. Some of the names of fire fairies are salamanders, dragons, drakes. Oh, drakes are so awesomely cool. So drakes take care of the house, the barn. They make sure that a person's house is in order, unless you mistreat them, and then they're going to create all kinds of havoc. But also drakes can travel in a second. If they live with someone and someone asks for something in a second, poof, they're there. They're amazing. And they smell like poisonous sulfurous fog. So if you ever are looking for fairies and you kind of have that sulfur smell, beware, my friend. There's probably a fire fairy near you. Oh, and then, of course, there's the willow wisps. Willow wisps are amazing. They are little lights that flash over bogs and marshes. And they love to lead weary travelers astray, right? So if you look out and you see these little lights, has anyone ever seen them? I remember that even from my 20s when I had forgotten my early fairy friends, that I would see little lights sometimes like coming out of flowers, right? But willow wisps are all over different cultures. They have many names, jack-o'-lanterns. They're not considered one of the more benevolent fairies, that's for sure. And then, of course, there's Gapta, Aitvara. Aitvara is seen as a dragon fairy. I love them. And we can connect to these fairies, as I said, by connecting to our personal fire, by watching a flame, by feeling our passion. And we can call on these fairies when we need that energy more in our lives. And so then, of course, water fairies. Sometimes we're looking at dust particles floating in the sunshine. They look like fairies to me. Would those be air fairies? Oh my God, I love that. Did anybody go outside this morning and see the little crystal snow here in Colorado? It was literally so tiny, you could barely see it. Definitely fairies. So again, Leanne, we're trying to categorize them in these places. So really trusting yourself, but yes, little rays I would call, because that's spark and it's coming from the sun. And really, how does it make you feel? When you see those sparkles, take a deep breath. And again, we experience fairies. So when you see those little sparkles in the air, take a deep breath. And what do you feel, right? Do you feel tingling? That's a fire fairy. Do you feel, sunbeams, rainbows? Oh, love it. I love watching the sun on water and the little light that flashes. Definitely fire fairies, meeting with the water fairies. So water, again, is the place of emotion, feeling, love, even grief. That's that place. Water fairies love to live near or in oceans, rivers, creeks, lakes, right? But also in our bathtubs, in our sinks, in our toilet bowl, right? They can live there and they can cause problems, so beware. Now, water fairies also can have a very, very dark element to them. Oh, yes, there's a water fairy. You can see that cutie patootie. She's awesome. And so we can just kind of look at her while we take some deep breaths and feel the water inside our bodies. And so this is a water fairy, and I want to just tell you about a couple water fairies the undines. Mostly they're called the undines. They're protector of waters. Again, undines can be like an umbrella term. Often they resemble humans, and she kind of resembles a human. Sometimes they'll resemble a human even more, though. Like sometimes people experience fairies looking like us, and so she's kind of like us, but not exactly. So I want to tell you about some dark water fairies that are fascinating. And so thank you for the photo. That's great. You're awesome. Yay for our team here at the Boulder Library. So the Kelpies are amazing. So Kelpies are, they disguise themselves, they're shapeshifters, and they describe they make themselves look like horses. And so somebody who needs a ride somewhere or whatever, they have them get on their back and they take off at an incredible speed, and then they dump them in water to drown, and they're never seen again. And another water fairy that's a little bit dark are the nymphs and nixies, right? They're Scandinavian Germanic, and they lure people to water with music. Right. Now that's another way we can experience fairies. I'm kind of clairaudio, and I can hear things and I can smell, and sometimes we can hear, right? Has anyone ever been in nature and suddenly the sounds of nature come alive, like really come alive? And so they call people to the water with music, and then they drown them. Right, those are the nymphs and nixies. There's many benevolent water fairies. Those are just couple of the darker ones. And so the last element is earth that we're going to talk about. And of course, these are the beings that live in rocks, mountains, hills, quarries, mine shafts, roots of trees. And these are the fairies we often think about too as fairies, right? They're solid, they're strong, right? Elves, gnomes. I love gnomes. They live under the ground, and they're not all like those gnome things. Although I do love statues, those gnome statues people put in their gardens. There's many different kinds of gnomes. My favorite are the kinds that live under mushrooms. So if you see mushrooms, you must not injure them, right? You have to look at the mushroom. There's the gnome. He's so cute. That gnome. Isn't he just so cute? I mean, look at that schmagaggy. Hi, gnome. Right? He's super cute. They're under the world. And, he looks a little grumpy, but, again, nature and humans too are made up of light and dark, right? So, fairies represent nature. So he is part of that world, as I keep saying, I know. So there's that gnome. And then, of course, there's dwarves. Now, dwarves live in mountains. And dwarves have a similar look, but they're very different in a way that they're a lot bigger, but they also have long beards. I'll tell you why in a second. So dwarves mine all day for precious metal. They can't come out during the day if they see light. Tolkien in Lord of the Rings made up a whole kind of fictional story that's become like Valinor. A lot of his beliefs have now become what people believe, right? So again, art creating reality, reality creating art. And so dwarves mine for precious metals, and then they make, armor, swords, artifacts, which they imbue with magical powers, right? Dwarfs were some of the beings that made a lot of the Norse gods, their magical, right? Like Thor, his magical hammer. And dwarfs, this is so cool. So dwarfs always look old, sort of like that gnome. But the reason is because dwarfs at 3 years old are at full maturity, right? Like we're much older. And by 6 or 7, they've got these long white beards, right? Oh, and then of course there's dryads, which are tree-dwelling beings. And so one of the ways that we can connect with these earth fairies is by spending a lot of time outside in nature. Am I the only one that hugs trees and kisses trees and talks to them? We can talk to trees. If you have a tree in your yard and, we're still in this pandemic and you can't go lots of places, talk to the tree. See if maybe you can develop a relationship with the spirit of the tree, which may eventually be a fairy that reveals themselves to you, right? Being in earth. So those are one way that we categorize fairies as elemental. And I just want to talk quickly about a few other ways that we categorize fairies. And again, if you have any questions, I know I'm going really fast. I blame the air fairies for that because I have a lot of them around me, are trooping and solitary. Now, again, trooping and solitary, trooping fairies are considered the aristocracy of fairyland. They're a court, right? And they travel around in their finest, and nymphs and pixies are trooping fairies. And if you see a trooping fairy, chances are, if you see one, there's going to be a lot more. And solitary fairies have no need to hang out with other fairies. And often, not always, but many solitary fairies are the fairies that will attach themselves to a human or a group of humans or a place. Now, within the trooping fairies is the unsteely and steely court. Now, this is a Scottish concept. And it's the belief that the steely court are very benevolent, right? The steely court are the good fairies. And the unsteely court, well, they are pure evil. And they'll do all kinds of heinous things. And so both steely and unsteely do these activities called wild hunts or night raids, RADES. And but if you're taken or if you see an unsteely court on one of their wild hunts, they'll take you and they'll torture you and they'll do all kinds of not cool things. And they'll even make you participate in their activities like elf shot. Elf shot is when the fairies have a little tiny bow and arrow and they shoot it and it will hit a human or non-human animal. And they'll either be paralyzed or very sick or die. And back in the day before modern medicine, they would blame a lot of sicknesses that they could not diagnose as elf shots. And one of the most interesting unsteely fairies that I think is the red cap. And so the red cap is a fairy that likes to live in castles, right? So again, it's more of an English, right? We don't have a lot of castles here like they do over there. They live in castles where they, what are some famous fairies from movies and TV? Okay, we'll get there. Oh, where was I? Oh, yes. So they live in castles where there was a lot of cruelty and violence, and then they'll dye their hat red in human blood, right? That's the red cap. But don't worry. I know some people that have had scary experiences with fairies, or they're a little bit, so they protect themselves. And there's a way to protect yourself from fairies, right? So if you're worried, you just turn your clothes inside out, right? So if there's something going on, turn your clothes inside out. You can also carry St. John's wort. There's putting your shoes at your bed with the toes facing away. There's salt, hanging a horseshoe above your house. The Bible, a crucifix, there's different ways to protect yourself from these types of fairies. Or iron, right? Iron and bells. And running water. I don't want to forget iron. You could put iron stakes around your house if you're not into fairies. But me, I welcome them. Okay, so we're going to get to the famous fairies in TV and movies, but just first, I want to talk. I have so much information. And so first I want to talk quickly about household fairies. Okay, so if you want to experience fairies in your house, go like this. Of course, I won't see you, but maybe I'll feel you. Fairies, send it to me. Go like this, or say yes in the comments and I'll see you. Okay, because fairies in our house is cool, man. Woman and they, but anyway, so household fairies, they like to live in the house, right? It's warm, it's cozy. We have lots of plants everywhere in our house. They like plants, they like the oven. And so it can be really, really fun to explore fairies of your own culture, right? So I'm Slavic, right? Ukrainian and Austrian. So I really like to study fairies from my lineage and connect with them. It doesn't matter that you're not there, right? You can still connect with them here. So one of the coolest fairies in Slavic is the Domovic or the Domovoi. And they're a household fairy. They'll do all kinds of cool things for you, similar to a brownie, right? Some of you might know a brownie, right? Brownies are English household fairies. Brownies will often help out, right? And they'll clean. Who wants one of those? They'll do lots of things in your house. But if you upset them, not cool. So the Domovoi and the Domovic don't just help out in the house, but the Domovoi and the Domovic can shapeshift into anybody. They will look like the house's previous owner. They can also shapeshift into an animal. They also have the gift of prophetic sight. So Domovois can tell the people in the house what's going to happen. Unfortunately, they usually will foretell misfortune if that's going to happen. So the Domovois are awesome if you're Slavic like me. There's also the leprechauns, which sometimes leprechauns that are pretty mischievous will become at night. And the leprechauns are so interesting because they're really famous in fairy lore. They live in wine cellars, right? They love to party at night. They'll drink all the wine. And if you take good care of this fairy, they will make sure that your wine and your money is well stocked. But if you don't, you're not going to have any wine left in your house. And there's lots of other ones, right? There's the Nisse in Scandinavia. And we can connect to these household fairies by connecting to our house, right? We're going to talk about altars and things like that in a moment. But really being aware, and I'm going to lead you on some kind of processes to get in touch with the fairies in just a moment. Okay, so fairies in TV, movies, lore. Anybody type in some of the most famous fairies in shows that you've seen. Type them in right now. I'd love to see, write them in the comments, and then she'll post it. There's some famous fairies. And so I want to really encourage you to explore the fairies from all over the world, from your place. So if you're Asian, right? There's so many fairies from Asia. One of the most interesting is the kitsune, which is a fox fairy. They can change from fox to human. Oh my goodness, they're amazing. There's the Tien, which are Vietnamese. There's so many. Tinkerbell. Yes, Tinkerbell. Anybody else? I know there's really not a lot of famous fairies in TV and movie. And also, so I am a lot older than most of you. And I literally spent 30 years of my life not watching TV movies when I was, well, maybe it's 25 years. So I was sort of out of the lore. No, Tinkerbell, that's a beautiful, but I don't want you to worry about the clapping will fall down dead. That's not going to happen. Tinkerbell created kind of a kind of a fairy, right? A style of fairy. I guess it was produced by Disney. I don't really know, but the movie. So she created, which again, type of fairy, not all fairies. Yeah, what are some other famous? Anybody else? There's quite a bit of movies that display dark fairies as well. I've never seen The Dark Crystal, but aren't there fairies in there? I really want to see it. I am not thinking, but I'm going to try to think of some more famous fairies in movies and TV as we go along. I was too busy bonding with trees to watch TV. I want to just talk quickly about one of my most favorite fairies, which is the Menehune. Sorry if I'm saying it wrong. The Menehune, we have a picture of them as well. And the Menehune are amazing. They're Hawaiian fairies. Look at that adorable being. And so they're hairy little beings. They can be anywhere from 6 inches to 2 to 3 feet. And they are so cool. They basically, yes, right. They love archery, singing. They're smart. They're strong. They're excellent craftspeople. The fairies of the earth are also craftspeople, right? More than humans could ever be. The Menehune, though, they're incredible. So one of their biggest skills is they have arrows, and they will shoot arrow at a very angry human, and they will transform their anger into love. So that's what fairies can do for us. That magic, right? They're transformational. They take us to a different place, to an altered reality, right? Fairies. And so the Menehune do that. They can transform you when you're feeling down. Connecting. Does anybody besides me just being out, right? Nature is my church, temple, therapy, meditation, right? It's transformational. Connecting with the winds, the air, right? Yes, somebody said yes. And so the Menehune do that actually. I mean, that's one of their skills. And they can also overnight build, these guys right here, build incredible temples and structures overnight. So that's the Menehune. So again, fairies from all over the world. There's many, many in Africa. There's the Aziza, which is a West African fairy, the Yumbos, from certain people from Senegal, West Africa. There's many in Mexico. Even the indigenous people of this country, of America, have many, all the tribes. The Iroquois had the Joga, which were small spirit folks. And the last one that I just want to mention, and we can talk more if we have questions, and please, if you have questions, I invite you to type them in, are the Yaksha, which are Hindu and Buddhist fairies. You have to listen to this. The Hindu Buddhist fairies, they can be, very obscure and just nature beings, but they can also turn into cannibalistic ogres, haunting the forest and devouring human and non-human animals, right? So how do we find Fae? Now, I really do suggest, trusting yourself. So fairies live in the liminal places, right? In thresholds, which is why with the world, what's going on, this is a very powerful time to connect to fairy energy. They often come out at dusk, right? When it turns from light to dark, because everything's shifting and nighttime creatures are coming alive. Also at dawn, at crossroads, thresholds of any kind, right? When you're beginning something new, right? They live in the between liminal places, but there's many people who believe that there's an alternate world somewhere, right, where fairies live. And many cultures have this belief. Of course, there's the Tirnanog, right, land of the young, right, which is in Ireland, right? That's where all the magical beings live. There's the Tylwyth Teg in Wales, which you could only find. It's a dangerous path. The only way you can get there is with a fairy guide, if you trust them. There's the Fortunate Isles in Greece. Of course, there's, can you talk about American indigenous beings? Yes, I will get there in a moment. And so there's Avalon. There's Avalon, which if you love the Arthurian legends, you know, when I was in England, I was looking for Avalon, right? Morgan Le Fay, the ultimate fairy, powerful being is from. And so like indigenous beings, like there are so many of them, like I would say that all tribes. So if you're interested, you would be amazed at how Wikipedia has so many fairies. Like if you put in Slavic fairies, they have like 30 and they have their own page. So if you put in indigenous people, there are so many. When I was living, oh my goodness, any Welsh fairies? Well, that's the land of like what we believe. I'll go there in a second. Yeah, so the indigenous people, like when I was living in, because I lived in New Mexico for a while, and we were on a Navajo, actually one of the most powerful experiences I ever had where I was terrified was on a Navajo mountain. And it was this belief that these beings came from like inside the mountain. So I would encourage you to research just really like learning about the indigenous beings, the tribe, especially like where you're from. You know, it's really important, I think, if you believe in spirit of place, to find out about whose land we're on, right? If we were looked up, oh yeah, there's quite a bit of Jewish demon fairies actually. And there's a bunch of Jewish fairies too. It's really cool. But what was I saying? The indigenous people. Yeah, I think it's really important. I would encourage you, like, where do you live? And are you living on land that was inhabited by indigenous people, right? And part of, you know, who were their beings, right? Because we built, we destroyed, we colonized. How can, you know, learning about those beings that are on your land? I mean, I feel like there's an infinite amount of fairies. Like I use the word infinite because, you know, different peoples of the world have like different beliefs, right? They kind of overlap, but many cultures are animistic. I mean, they believe, or a lot of people believe in these fairies. So as far as Welsh, a lot of the mythology that I gave does come from the Celtic area. A lot of what we believe, like Steely and Unsteely, I mean, it's Scottish, but it probably went over to Wales. And I'm spacing. I feel like Brian Froud lives in Wales, but it might be Scotland. Anyway, and I want to talk about resources in a moment too. But so much of the fairies that I talked about. So if you study lore and fairies, I mean, Wales there's so many fairies. A lot of the fairies we talked about are actually from there. And that mythology spread, right? Like all over. Okay, I know I'm so glad you're asking questions. Oh my goodness, we only have 8 minutes. Okay, so I just want to talk. How do we experience fairies? We experience fairies in so many different ways. I really want to encourage you to maybe not look so linearly with your eyes, but realize that we experience these beings, right? It's an energy. And in just a few moments, I'm going to lead you on a process. So think about it as like, you know, when you're about to do something and you feel scared or you feel love or you feel tingling, that could be an essence, or your temperature changes. Right. So, and also using our imagination is okay to help us enter this realm. Right. We're taught, you know, by the reality police that everything has to be so, you know, structured if you don't see it and like touch it. But there's many different ways. Spending lots of time in nature. And when you see different parts on a hike or even a walk in a neighborhood, and something is tingly or feels different, go there. Like I was on the South Mesa Trail, if anyone knows it, it's in Boulder. I don't live in Boulder, but I live in Colorado. And I walked by this one rock a gazillion times. And one day it's this huge rock and it was smiling. It had this huge branch, which was forming a smile, and two eyes that were like holes in the rock that had never been there, right? Perhaps if I go deeper into that, I will have a relationship. And cultivating a relationship with the fairy realm is just like cultivating any relationship, right? You spend time, you learn, you open, you hear what they have to say. And I encourage you too, when you're in nature, to hear with your knees or your nose, to smell with your mouth, right? To open to that area. You know, if a part of nature speaks to you, and then creating an altar. And if you want to connect with a certain type of fairy more, like maybe you feel like you need to open your heart and you want to connect more to water fairies, you could create the altar in your bathroom. You could put a chalice of water, you know, earth. You could put stones and rocks and figurines that speak of fairies and nature to you, and sit in front of your altar. Like, use it, write, dream, pray, ask questions, draw fairies, whatever. Fairies do like to dance and sing. That is a real thing. And so dance and sing, do it outside, and do it as a way to connect to these beings. And of course, if you've heard it once, you've heard it a million times, meditation, right? We have to get, well, not we have to, but it's helpful to get out of our the mind that has so many thoughts, and connecting to nature. So now I want to lead you on a quick little kind of meditation process to help us connect to the fairy realm. And I encourage you now, if you want to stand up, great. It's even better if you stand up, but I'm going to stay sitting. And so if you want to sit, you can sit and do it that way. But I'm going to lead you on a process. And Leanne, if you want to come now, we're going to do our process together. Dun, da, da. She was here. She was gone. That's okay. So there she is. Oh, you're standing. Nice. Hi, Leanne.
Hi.
So you're going to stand or sit, and I want you to just close your eyes and take some deep breaths. And I want you to balance your sit bones, right? Balance yourself on the chair, or if you're standing, on your feet. And now we're going to imagine that there's energy coming out of our tailbone. So as you inhale, the energy goes down from your head to your tail, right? So it goes down all the way down your spine. And as you exhale, it comes up. So inhale, the energy goes down to your tailbone, and you exhale, it comes up. Now, when you're next, and we're going to do this pretty quick. When you do this by yourself, you can rewatch this because it'll be on YouTube. You can, take longer. I want you to imagine now that the energy is coming all the way down through your tailbone, down past your body like a tail out of you. And as you exhale, it comes up, right? So inhale, elongate this tail so that it goes all the way down to the earth. And if you're sitting, maybe it goes into the earth, right? And as you exhale, it comes up. So keep doing that and feel your tail. And for fun, move your tail around. Maybe you want to lift it, and the energetic tail, or in Leanne's case, I think she has a real tail. You're going to put it, you can even touch, if you've got a dog or a cat or a human, maybe touch them with your tail. But keep the breathing, right? Inhale all the way out, touch them. And inhale comes, right? And exhale comes up. And you don't want to play tricks with people, right? But you can imagine that you have this tail. Great. Now, what else we want to do is we want to open our wings. So I want you, with your eyes open or closed, to imagine that you have little wing buds in your back, right? And imagine them unfurling. Imagine them opening up. And maybe, I want you to see your wings. Are they huge? Maybe they fill the room. Or maybe they're tiny, like little tiny wings. Really feel the wings opening up. Right? And now you're open, right? So to connect with fairies, we want to be grounded. That's the tail. And we want to be open. And we're doing it in the fairy realm. Now, in this place, I invite you now to open your eyes and just look around the room. And notice, use all of your senses. Is there a place in the room that's calling you? Is there a place in the room that has a different temperature? Is there a wind moving through you? right? Maybe there's light. Maybe suddenly there's glowing, or you see the sun coming through your window in a certain way. Sometimes I see fairies in the smoke from my incense, right? Paying attention to the subtlety, right? Note that. And now, once again, close your eyes. And I want you to call a fairy in your mind. And if a being comes to you, great. And if not, just use your imagination. Sometimes it's just the magic push we need to enter the world of enchantment. And trust whatever comes to you. If they come as a light, if they look human, great. If they're an animal, a plant, see the fairy, and now accentuate it. Make the fairy even more real in your mind. And I want you to ask them a question. And if you don't have a question I would suggest, and then I'll stop talking for 30 seconds so you can do it, is how can I experience the fairy realm more? Because I assume if you're here, you're open to that. So ask that question. How can I experience the fairy realm more? And I'll give you a moment to see, feel, and experience the fairy inside. When you're finished, you can open your eyes. And later, when this is over, which it will be very soon, I invite you to write down experiences. And, are there any questions? Because obviously we're at the end. I have a couple quotes I want to finish with, but if you're in Boulder, it's snowing right now, maybe communicating with the Fae folks. Yes. Freya, the winter fairy. I love the winter fairy. I mean, where do you think snow angels came from? Speaking of the library, I know the Boulder Library is going to put some links. There's a lot of resources. So Brian Froud, I'm a big fan, has this brilliant book, which I know they have at the library. It's the Good Fairy, Bad Fairy book. And I trust a lot of his insight. And if you're into divination and you're that type, like a tarot type like me, he also has these oracle cards, which are spectacular. They're just really beautiful. And I would recommend, you can see they're well worn. I love them. One of Brian Froud's first book he did with Alan Lee was Fairies. He's got a lot. And this is great if you're an adult or even a teen or tween. It's not like a book for kids, but it's a true story about a woman who went on a journey to different places in Ireland and England. And that I think she might even go to Wales, her experience looking for fairies. We didn't talk about the Cottingley fairies, right? But if you've heard about this, they're fascinating. The whole world believed in fairies after them. And there's also the Fairy Bible, which I know they have at the Boulder Library. That maybe we'll put in a link for that. There's lots of books, resources, but again, your own experience is really the best. And I'd love it if you want to type in no last questions, just, a takeaway, is there anything that you took away from this? I'd love to hear that, if this helped to deepen even just a nugget. I hope it was fun and inspiring. And, the fairies need us. Taking care of nature is also a way to honor the fairies, eating more plants and cleaning up and that kind of thing. And any last questions, Leanne, that you have? And then I'll end with a couple of quotes.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about the fairies this morning, and I agree about, taking care of the earth is a way to connect with the fairies, like recycling and composting. I always feel like I'm doing something good for the earth and the nature fairies too. So while we're waiting for anyone to chime in with any takeaways, I like that question. I just wanted to say thank you again, Erica, the Enchantress. We'll put some of Erica's links in the chat if you want to learn more about her and the magical work she does. And I always like to say that she helps us see the magic within ourselves as well, and because I think we all have that. and we need that, right? So thank you again, Erica, and I hope you'll come back and be with us again and teach us more about the Fae folk.
I would love to. Oh my God, I love, Leanne, that you had me and that we did this program, and I appreciate your words. And thank you for putting in my promo. I am available for all kinds of parties, events, and I'm doing lots of virtual things. So if you have a meeting, a group, I'm a magician, and my professional magician and mentalist and speaker, and my passion really is where real magic and performance magic meet. And I feel like the Fairies is a place where that happens. So as we go out, I'm just going to read some quotes. And again, I guess there's no last questions, but if you think of a question later, feel free to reach out to me, my information, or ask the Fairies. And I'm just going to share some quotes with you. And if a question comes in, Leanne will come back on and tell us. Fairies are not fantasy, but a connection to reality. Fairies are irrational, poetic, absurd, and very, very wise. Fairies say there is nonsense in dogma and sense in nonsense. Fairies express themselves with high seriousness and low humor. Fairies are resistant to all definitions. Any time that is betwixt was great. I would love that, Miss Goddess Fairy Nancy. I'm so happy. I see you in the astral realm, Nancy. I see your beautiful face and voice twinkling. Any time that is betwixt and between or transitional is the fairies' favorite time. They inhabit transitional spaces, the bottom of the garden, existing in a space between human-made cultivation and wilderness. Look for them in the space between nurture and nature. They are to be found at all borders and boundaries, or on the edges of water where it is neither land nor lake, path nor pond. They come when we are half asleep. They come at moments when we least expect them, when our rational mind balances with the fluid irrational. Fairies don't like to be named. There are so many of them, and humans have always wanted to categorize them. In that way, we think we can have control over them. Yeah, I didn't even talk about so much of their mischief and their trickery. And, oh, yay, you're welcome. I love your photo, you fairy goddess, you in that picture. You're welcome. And I have two more quotes. And if you're a gardener, I encourage you this summer to research plants that the fairies love, because the fairies love lots of plants. Foxglove, primrose, there's some that are very connected to them. Rowan is one of their sacred trees. I have two more quotes. Fairies are seen through the heart, not through the eyes. Remember that fairies inhabit the interior of the earth and the interior of all things. So look in the first place in the interior of yourself. They help us know ourselves. And we will go out with the short but sweet quote that applies to me, and I hope it applies to you. Once you step onto the fairy path, it's almost like there's no way off. You have to keep going. We thank you, Fae spirits. Wishing you a magical day, and I hope you get outside. And if you can't get outside, I hope you look for the Fae in your own heart and home today. Mwah, love you.